Hello, your friendly neighborhood host JT Wheatley here again for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. This time for the fourth and final part of the War on Comic Books. When we last left off, comic books have now found themselves fully under the complete hold of the Comics Code Authority and trying to survive. And by 1956, there were only 250 titles being published in the comic book industry in America, while more publishers went under, such as Star, Sterling, Toby Press, United Features, and Eastern Color. In 1955, the breakthrough, yet now infamous Crime Does Not Pay comic would also be canceled, despite Lou Gleason's efforts to protect crime comics in the CCA, as sales dropped from $2.7 million a month to just $800,000, a figure comic sellers would rather love today. By 1956, Ace, Avon, Premiere, and Superior ended as publishers as well. Timely, the future Marvel newly went under as well when it lost its distributor until Independent News, which was owned by National Publications, came in and saved it, but only at the restrictions of 8 comics a month. Many just left the business altogether, as Jack Cole drew for Playboy only to kill himself in August 1958 with a .22 rifle, reportedly over debt. In his suicide note, he wrote to Hugh Hefner, the owner of Playboy, "Sorry for owing you so much." It was a sad end for the Golden Age artist and the creator of Plastic Man. As for the CCA, it would continue to control the industry for decades, with some protests resulting in the underground comics market, with artists like Robert Crumb publishing outside of conventional distributors to avoid the code. Other companies like Warren followed EC's example with Mad Magazine, launching a series of black and white comic magazines like Eerie and Vampirella that, due to being a magazine over a comic book format, could avoid the CCA altogether. For comic books still under the code, one stupid incident with it was with the crediting of writer Marv Wolfman in The House of Secrets number 38 on January of 1970, claiming that Wolfman was a violation of not depicting supernatural monsters such as werewolves, vampires, and zombies. Fellow writer Jerry Conway had to explain to the CCA that Marv Wolfman was his actual name, and as a result the authority relented on the condition that his credit appeared on the first page of the story. As a side result, DC started to provide credits to all the writers in his supernatural anthology stories. The next year, the first direct challenge to the CCA came when Stan Lee and Marvel worked with the U.S. Department of Health to produce an anti-drug story in The Amazing Spider-Man. Lee agreed to a 3-part story to appear in number 96 to 98 from May to July of 1971 and submitted the story for CCA approval. While the CCA had forbidden the depictions of drugs in comic book stories, it did have a clause to allow for exceptions, as long as the story kept within the spirit of the code. This was allowed in Strange Adventures number 205 in October of 1967, which featured the premiere of Dead Man when he fought against opium smugglers. However, when Marvel submitted its story, acting administrator John Goldwater rejected it, claiming the Dead Man story depicted a drug transaction, while the Spider-Man story actually showed drug use. Stanley was not deterred, and with the backing of the federal government, ran the story anyway without cold approval. Marvel did receive some backlash, notably from Carmen Infantino, the head of DC at the time, who said that while DC would love to do an anti-drug story, it wouldn't without cold approval. Overwhelmingly, though, the reaction was positive, with many praising Marvel for providing a positive and grown-up story for their readers, while the CCA was lambasted for trying to prevent it. Seeing the writing on the wall, the CCA, for the first time in 17 years since its inception, altered its code. Criminals allowed to be more sympathetic, law enforcement could be killed in line of duty, and monsters could be depicted, such as vampires and werewolves, for the first time in years, as long as they were handled in the classic tradition. Thus, Marvel launched the classic Tomb of Dracula series, one of the best comic books of the 1970s. Zombies were still forbidden, thus when they started appearing in Marvel Comics, they had to be called Zombies, though all the readers knew what they were. DC even got to do their anti-drug story in Green Lantern Green Arrow number 85 on September of 1971 by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, where Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy was shown to be a heroin addict. Nevertheless, comic book publishers and dealers still faced legal challenges, so in 1986 the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund was set up to provide funding for legal defenses in such cases. It was spurred on when Michael Correa, the store manager at Friendly Frank's in Lansing, Illinois, was charged with the sale and possession of obscene material, which included over 100 comic books from Omaha to Dances to Veronica. He was convicted, but the case was overturned on appeal, and so much money was raised for his defense that the excess was used to form the CBLDF. The fund remains active to this day, notably defending Ryan Matheson in 2010 when he was flying from the United States to Canada. His computer was searched, and the authorities discovered manga on it, which they believed to be child pornography. The CBLDF assisted with the legal funds. The Canadian government withdrew all criminal charges. Since this is still a fairly recent case, I still encourage listeners to visit cbldf.org and donate if they can. While the code was still intact, the cracks were forming, and by Moon Knight number 21 in July 1982, the hero fought properly named zombies, while Elvira's House of Mystery number 2 on February 1986 featured numerous decapitations, all with code approval. It was instances like this that saw creators and publishers tangling with the CCA more, as it became murkier what could be approved and what couldn't. For example, the CCA disapproved of a more graphic depiction of Kyle Rayner's girlfriend being murdered and stuffed in the refrigerator in the Green Lantern number 54 in 1994, a story that also launched the Women in Refrigerators website by feminist comic book writers over brutal depictions of women in comics. It was becoming apparent that the code was being ignored and outdated. Finally, in 2001, Marvel, the same company that formed those first cracks in the CCA, left the organization completely and set up their own in-house code for regulating their content. Once the comics' biggest publishers left, it was only a matter of time, and the CCA and the CMAA limped along for another decade, with Bongo leaving without even an announcement or many readers noticing. Archie Comics president Mike Perilletto even admitted to slapping the CCA's seal on their books without even submitting them, stating that they didn't put women in fridges in their comic books. By January of 2011, DC left the CMAA as well to set up their own in-house code, and Archie did a day later, as they were the last publisher of the organization at that point. With no funding from publishers, the CMAA went defunct, and in a beautiful twist, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund acquired the intellectual property rights to the Comic Code's Authority seal. By the way, if you saw Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse, I can't help but laugh when that Comic Code's Authority seal appears in the opening credits. That is a wonderful twist. As for Frederick Werven, whose Seduction of the Innocent book spurred on the fight against comic books, he would continue in his moral crusade, reportedly trying to get a new book published, The War on Children, in 1959, about the effects of TV had on children, but couldn't find a publisher. He would write another book, A Sign of Cain, about medical professionals involved in 1966, and during his promotion, he appeared on The Mike Douglas Show, where he debated his beliefs with co-host Barbara Feldon and actor Vincent Price. During the 1970s, Werven's attitude on comic books seemed to mellow, and he would state he never was for censorship or against comic books in principle. In fact, his last book, The World of the Fanzines, in 1974, examined the comic book fandom and concluded that fanzines were constructive and healthy for creative drives. This was enough to get Werven invited to the New York Comic Art Convention, but still fearing the hatred many comic book fans felt toward him, he turned it down. He will eventually be made a professor of psychology at the New York University, senior psychiatrist at the New York City Department of Hospitals, and psychiatrist and director of the Medical Hygiene Clinic at the Bellevue Hospital. Werven would die on November 18, 1981, at his retirement home in Kempton, Pennsylvania, at the age of 86. After his death, his papers were re-examined by Carol Tilley, assistant professor at the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois in 2010, and found that his conclusion on Seduction of Innocent largely baseless. Tilley noted his methodology was flawed, using a non-representative sample of children for the research, many of whom were already mentally ill. Even then, he manipulated their statements to fit his conclusions. The following year, his activism was cited in the 2011 Brown v. the Entertainment Merchants Association, which struck down the California law that banned the sale of video games to children on First Amendment grounds. Thankfully, video games have avoided that happening to comic books. I won't get into how their rating system, the ESRB, is much better, but if you ever want to get into how they avoided it, check out the Gaming Historian, the YouTube channel. It is fantastic. It's a fantastic episode on how the video game industry formed their own in-house code. Today, Werven is largely remembered as a demagogue, but he was much more complex than that. What gets forgotten before his ill-gotten war against comic books was that he was a champion of racial justice whose work was a small but significant part of overturning the legalized segregation in Brown v. Board of Education. Sadly, he is openly known as the enemy of free speech, who helped set an entire industry back decades. As for the other principals in these events, EC Comic Books, of course, went under, with only Mad Magazine surviving, though Bill Gaines would later comment how it ended up being his most successful venture. Today, EC Comic Books is now fondly remembered as one of the high points of the comic book medium. For more on this, please listen to the previous History of EC Comic Books episodes. Johnny Craig, the artist of the cover of the once infamous but now classic Crime Suspense Stories number 22, would have a long career in comic books, working for DC and Marvel before dying in 2001. On January 15, 2005, he was posthumously inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame for comic book creators at the San Diego Comic-Con. As for the comic book medium as a whole, at least in America, it was set back decades. With mature storytelling severely limited, along with the stigma of comic books were just for children, it took some time before we started to see comic books like Crime Does Not Pay or Tales from the Crypt in America. During this time, the superhero genre, one of the few that could survive the rigorous CCA standards, emerged as the top comic books, and even then were extremely limited. It would not be until the 1980s before such classics as The Dark Knight Returns or The Watchmen would push superheroes in exciting new directions. Even today, comic books are still viewed by some as just for children, though to visit any local comic book store will tell you anyone that is no longer the case. Comic books, like any medium, are meant for all ages, just as TV, movies, and video games are. In a way, these episodes are an excellent example of why we study history so we can learn from it. In researching this subject, I couldn't help but be struck by deja vu by how many times the same excuses have been used over and over again to attack comic books, movies, and so forth as the source for all that is wrong in the world, only to be proven that's not the case years later. So the next time you hear an activist or a politician trying to blame crime or poverty on anything unrelated to it, whether it be guns, immigrants, drugs, or video games, remember those attacks were made long ago as comic books, and they were wrong then too. I would like to thank my main source for these episodes, The 10-Cent Plague, The Great Comic Book Scare and How It Changed America by David Hajood, an excellent and informative read that is perfect for anyone who wants to do a deep dive on this subject. Please pick it up wherever books are sold. And now is February 7th, 2019, time for some reviews. First up, of course, favorite comic book of the week, Conan the Barbarian by Jason Aaron and Mahmoud Ashir, which finds a previous tale about Conan as a young man and thief being captured by the people of Numidia and set to be executed at their fabled Red Tree, only to have them deal with both the Cimmerian's classic stubbornness along with some divine intervention. Jason Aaron once again does a great job readapting this classic tale for the new Marvel comic and really crediting Conan's devout resoluteness that even when he's tied down, he claims, I'm going to kill everyone that hurts him. While Mahmoud Ashir's art has a perfect medieval fantasy flair, and he really captures Conan's fierceness as well. All that plus a cliffhanger that hints that Conan surviving this ordeal may not be the best thing for him, and this is a great return of this classic comic book to the Marvel fold. Also, I finally got a chance to get caught up on the Punisher Season 2 on Netflix, and I have to say it's better than even the original season, or that being Season 1. John Bernthal remains the perfect Punisher, capturing both his righteous fury, believing he actually is doing right, killing all these criminals indiscriminately, while also a bit of gravitas and pathos, as he does understanding he's going down a really dark path. Ben Barnes is also excellent as the revived Jigsaw, who actually makes you kind of sympathetic at times, even though he is still a pretty bad guy. The showrunners do a great job balancing the show for the most part, and it never tires over 13 episodes, though the two subplots don't gel as perfectly, but it still works overall, along with some great action. Don't worry, the Punisher takes out plenty of bad guys during this series. Heck, he probably kills 20 by the first 3 episodes alone. Great action, great characters, and hopefully Netflix doesn't cancel this series too. But once again, if they do, yo Marvel Disney, you got Hulu now. Be a great addition to the lineup. Also, we had an impromptu podcast meeting of many of the podcasters in the upstate of South Carolina. The Joneses from the Nerd Bliss, Dan and Adam from Thunder Talk, and Tyler Butler from Enough of the BS podcast all got together for the Super Bowl to watch the Patriots cement their place as the greatest football team of all time with a 6th Super Bowl win. In Atlanta, too, Adam. So, yeah, not only did Julian Edelman, who bought me dinner, go and get a Super Bowl MVP, but they did it in Atlanta, which the only thing his Falcons are able to do is blowing 25-point leads in Super Bowls. All in good fun, though. Definitely check out all those podcasts. Once again, Nerd Bliss, Enough of the BS, and Thunder Talk. Check them out on iTunes, Switcher, Spreaker, or wherever you can listen to a podcast. And, of course, check out mine too in all those formats and give a rating and review if you can. And with that, we'll be concluding these 4-parter on the War Against Comics. Next week, we will be starting a 2-parter on the history of the current comic book genre. Until then, go on and enjoy yourself a good comic book.